It's my pleasure to have Tim Ries with me today for the Phileas Jazz Archive. Would you like to hear what Wiki says about you?
Oh boy, okay.
Okay.
Who's Wiki?
He gets around. So Wikipedia says, his universe of work as a composer, arranger, and instrumentalist ranges from rock to jazz to experimental to ethno to fusions of respective genres thereof.
Well, Wiki's, I could be correct.
I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, this thought occurred to me in the last couple of days because I visited your website and there's 3 particular videos that you had up there of varying kinds of music. And then hearing your set, the way you played, and your set list, I wondered if, as a child, you were an extraordinarily curious boy.
I was. I grew up in Michigan, and my father played the trumpet, and my mother played piano. I had 3 sisters. They all took piano lessons. And it's funny because my father also worked at a factory, as many people in Michigan did, but on the weekends played gigs. So when I was a little kid, he would take me to his gigs. So I was like really small, and I would go, and he usually had a band of 1 or 2 saxophones in the band, piano and or accordion, bass drums, guitar, you know, and so he would sing and play the trumpet, and it was like a band that would play for parties and weddings and stuff like that. So as a little kid, and it was always the weddings and parties, I would be part of these, you know, because I would always know some other little kids who would be at the party. So I would be there like running around, but then hearing the band, and I would, of course, my dad, I of course loved him dearly. He's been gone 30 years, but I would sit there at the edge of the stage and watch him and look at the saxophones. And so I wanted to start playing trumpet like he did. So I was, you know, started that, and then I think he thought maybe he would have to replace one of his saxophone players, so he was like pushing me more towards, hey, maybe would you like to play the saxophone? So one day he brought a saxophone home, like, you know, for birthday or something like that, and it was quite young, so I was starting to sit in with him when I was 10 years old. So I was already curious about the music that he played, which was mostly older music, like of the swing era, you know, like old jazz standards. But then he would also incorporate a couple of rock tunes because people, you know, younger people would want to play, you know, Proud Mary or one of those, you know, rock, you know, like, and he had to entertain the people. So I saw what it was like to play music and have to do different kinds of things, not just what you maybe like, but what the people might like. And then, but then growing up in the Detroit area, when I was still too young to drive, he would drive me to Detroit to sit in with musicians, and then to Toledo, Ohio, which was very close, and sitting in with like great jazz musicians. And there were so many of the Motown people that never left when Motown moved to California. They just stayed in Detroit, and they were like fantastic jazz musicians. So I got to hear and play and sit in with all these great musicians. So I was always being introduced to great musicians, and my dad would then have like the musicians come back to our house, and we would have jam sessions till 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and my mother would cook, and so I would fall asleep on the couch to like this great music. And I remember as a kid, like being, I don't know, like 10, 11, 12 years old, Saturday mornings watching Soul Train, because that was like, for me, I loved it. It was like, oh, this is the greatest music ever, you know, like, you know, and seeing the dancing, and I would, you know, this little white kid who loved Soul Train. It was just like, all music was good, you know. It was like, if it was like, especially like that, and I love Stevie Wonder, of course, and Aretha, and, you know, the Temptations, the Four Tops, and I got a chance to then to play with all these people when I was older. So it was such a cool thing growing up. And so we had this big house with a lot of property, so I would go practice outside. So I had the advantage of being in a quiet like area, but then close enough to a bigger city to hang out with musicians and learn from them. And so that was really amazing. So I was quite curious as a young person. And then, you know, my dad played the trumpet, but he would come home from his day job and sit at the piano. And he wasn't trained as a pianist, but then he would just kind of improvise and kind of compose the stuff. And just, I remember as being a little kid, and I would be in there and I would watch him, not knowing what he was doing. And then he would leave, and I would just sit at the piano and try to imitate that vibe. Because I think it was his way of just escaping the world, the workday, and all. And that was his release. And I saw that in him. Like he was different on the piano than he was even on the trumpet, or that it just, he was in this other world. And I remember like, he never said anything, and I just saw it, and it was like, how do I capture that? And I remember my oldest sister, who was taking piano lessons, right, studying the piano. I wasn't studying the piano, I was just trying to get that vibe. She'd come, what are you playing? That's just nonsense, you know, because I was just improvising. And because she said that, I was like, oh yeah, well then I would do it more, because I would, you know.
Well, I was just thinking that now, because I'm wondering if you learned how to improvise before you had any theoretical basis for what you were doing.
I did, and just I think to capture mostly that feeling of seeing him, because I had an older brother who died, so and he was the oldest and I was the youngest. So I often wonder if, like, you know, me having 3 children, that can't imagine that happening. So I wonder if also that was his going into that other world or something. But he was very different at the piano than on the trumpet. He was like beautiful sound, amazing tone. In fact, I remember as a little kid being on one of his gigs, and it was a dance gig, and he always had 300, 400, 500 people. It was huge amounts of people. And what would often be the case with that period is people would like go hear musicians play, and then, you know, you see people dancing, and then they would get close to the bandstand, and then they'd just watch the band, and they would kind of like hear who was ever taking a solo or something. And my dad wasn't like a heavy improviser, but one of the most beautiful tones, and just singing through the instrument. And I remember this young couple, maybe in their 20s, maybe they were going to get married or something, but they were dancing in the front, and they stopped in front of the stage and were watching my father play, and he was playing a melody to a ballad, and I remember both of them started crying. And I thought to myself, my dad, just playing a melody made somebody cry. So I think before the notes and how you know, without impressing anybody with your technique, just the idea that music really can capture this heavy emotional, you know, seeing him going into that place on the piano, but also then channeling that on the trumpet too. So I you know, and then a neighbor who also played the trumpet, and I was started trying to like, how do I improvise? How do I do this? And I saw these fake books with the music, and he came over and he played the trumpet, but he also could play piano. And he sat down and was like, looked at the fake book, and it was like, I said, how are you doing that? He goes, oh, this is super easy. This is the bass note. I just play the bass note on the left, bass in 5th or the 7th, and this is the root in 3rd. I'm like, that's it? He goes, yeah. Then it was like a whole new world. Like, oh, now I can start like figuring out these chords. And then there was a university near my house. My dad took me to that, and I met with this professor in high school, and he started to do improvisation lessons, and he played the organ and piano and trumpet and trombone. He was a very, very musical guy named Mike Lorenz. He was great. And that was it. It was kind of like opening the door to like, now I get the theoretical idea of it as plus. Now I know the emotional aspect of it, but like now, theoretically, what is this chord? How do you do that? And then to dissect the chord, and then I started composing.
I'm not sure how to ask this, but after hearing you play, which was really terrific last night, I should tell our viewers it was in Utica, New York, a cool little place called The Other Side. It seems to me you have abundant technique to play whatever you want. I'm going to go from that premise. So is the challenge not so much how to play it, but what to think of? What's something tonight that I can do that I haven't done repeatedly? And if that statement is sort of true, where do your ideas come from?
Well, thank you for the kind words. It was a really cool place to play, actually. The Other Side, and it was a nice gallery with artwork and stuff, and then I would say, you know, it was full of people, but what was 60 people? You know, it was like packed, but it's a small place. So, but really, you know, talking to people before, during this break, and then afterwards, really, it's a kind of a cool thing about jazz or this improvised music is that those people were there to really hear music, and they stayed, and then talking to them, and just you realize this music is really about community in a sense, not only on the stage, but then a small audience, you get that more than you can in a big arena or a big theater, where you can really engage with the people, like local people, and get to know them, and that feeling is really cool. But as far as the technique and what to play while improvising and what not, it's almost what not to do in a sense. But the idea, like, as an individual person, whatever instrument that you're playing, there's all the years that it takes to get to the place where you can be able to facilitate the ideas that you have. So the more technique you have, like someone like John Coltrane or Freddie Hubbard or Art Tatum or somebody with just the most incredible technique, and you hear that and you just realize that the true brilliant maestros of the music from the past, and there's so many, it's almost like, okay, that's there, and I'm probably never going to reach that level. I'm trying to reach the level of Coltrane and Charlie Parker and Lester Young. That's been set, that standard of brilliance. So I'm trying to attain that in my practicing and trying to develop a technique so that I can get there. So I'm trying to reach the mountaintop, but and it took me a long time to realize, okay, that's there, and I'm going to try to get there, but I'm going to be satisfied with what I'm doing today. So not judging myself as I'm playing, which is really hard. So as you're that day kind of playing whatever happens, and I truly believe that music, and maybe it's because of my father and seeing that vibe, is like, I think that the music is there. It's already in the atmosphere, or it's coming from a high spiritual place, that if you are accepting of that, if you just allow it to come through you and you don't get in the way of it, not to diminish the technique. So you need technique to be able to like play that note in tune. So you need the technique for just the rudimentary aspect of the instrument. But then that's just technique. Then you have to just allow the music to happen. And that's what's the beautiful part about improvised music and jazz, is that then you also hear the drummer do something, or the Ron last night playing the organ. Okay, the way he chorded it, or like that connection you have, the conversation. So then it's a combination of like accepting what's coming in, accepting what's happening around you, and then the feeling of the room, actually, when you kind of just sense the vibes from the people. There's all that combination it plays a part of it. And I think last night was just really special because playing with good musicians in a cool place with good people there, that all comes together.
It was clear to me that you understand the importance and the power of space and dynamics, because there was a number of times, one time when you were played the melody to Bye Bye Blackbird, and there was all those like holes in there, and Ron was playing a little bit behind you, but I don't hear people do that much, and I wonder why you did, and I wondered, is it because this audience is very quiet in there, and those silences, man, are very...
Well, it's often what you don't play which is more powerful, giving that space in thought, but also to allow the other musicians around to give him time to add his thing. So I think that's that. I do my best. I still, of the people who leave the most space, well, of course, Miles Davis and Wayne Shorter and those incredible, I still am trying to get to that place. Or like if you see Wayne Shorter's group play, often he will just play a couple of notes and just like stand there for a long period of time, and you kind of, and it's that whole time like, okay, now what is he going to play? And it's pretty special. So those memories of like, okay, and you have this period of time, like I say, so it's like, you can fill up every space and like play all the technique you have, but what does that mean? It's like, okay, there's a lot of other saxophone players who have way more technique than me. I feel like I have a decent amount of technique, but I don't need to show it all the time. So I try to think, first of all, the melody, and I'm trying to like my father. So I'm trying to sing through the instrument. I'm trying to make it like, let's say, a very well-known song like that, and think about like Ella or Sarah Vaughan or somebody singing it, you know, like how would I sing this, you know?
When you're improvising, is there such a thing as a mistake for you?
Well, I'm not thinking about that at the time. I'm not thinking about, because if you get in that mindset, then if you think about the mistakes, then you're in that mistake. Then you're like, oh, So if that takes over, where you're thinking about the mistakes rather than just the time that you're doing this, then you inhibit not only that second that you're in, but then the upcoming thing. So I try not. Of course, if I listen, if I listen back to if I recorded it, listen back, I'd go, Then you analyze, and you're your own worst critic in a way. I try not to get in the way of that while playing, because then that could. And it took me actually. I'm now 62. It took me until I was almost 50, I think, before somebody, like, let's say last night, I finished the concert and many people came up and we were talking, oh, thank you for the night. It was great. It was a lovely concert, all the compliments. Now I can say, thank you very much. I appreciate your kind words. And I'm able to now accept the compliment that somebody had a good time. Because up until that point, until I was like 50, I would be like in my head, I'm thinking, really? Like you enjoyed that? Because didn't you hear those mistakes? All of those things, that's in our own minutia of our own psyche. I don't need to involve people with that. Because I don't need to like my own critic of myself. Yeah. I don't need to. Now I can just say, I share this time with you. And like I was talking about before, you were a part of that experience too, because that person changed maybe the way I play, because I look out in the audience, and if I'm talking a little bit before, you have a connection with the audience. So I don't want to ruin that experience for somebody. And so I don't want to get in my own way, which I can, but I'm trying my best to push aside the critique. It's difficult.
Yeah, you don't want to make someone regret giving you a compliment, like, didn't you hear that high note I went for and I didn't get? I mean,
that's
it's like counterproductive. For sure.
So I try to stay away from myself and the judging, and certainly at the time of the mistake, because then you're really trapped. Because the whole thing about improvisation, you're trying to move forward. You're trying to you don't want to be stuck in 2 seconds ago. You want to be really in the now. That's the idea, is like to capture that moment right now.
Do you think you play differently when the length of your improvisation is open-ended? Like last night, you pretty much can decide as you're playing how many choruses you're going to do, where if you're playing a solo with a band you're not leading it, perhaps I need to limit myself. So is there a thought process that you take that into account? Like, I'm going to do 2 choruses, so do you play differently if you have a time limit?
Yes. I mean, well, for instance, last night was more open-ended, and I didn't have to limit, as you said, limit myself. I could do 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. Like, there was a period where the accordion player, Al, came up and sat in, right? So we're incorporating a guy who does polka music, right, with the accordion, because Ron Oswanski also is an amazing accordion player and can do polkas growing up. He grew up in a Polish household, and he played all that stuff, but he also can improvise and play jazz. He's incredible. So I called him. I said, you going to bring your accordion? He goes, well. I said, well, bring it. Maybe we'll do a duet. And then before the gig, he introduced me to Al. I said, well, Al, why don't you come and join us? And we're trying to figure out what. So then we did this Ukrainian polka because of the Ukrainian situation. So, but Ron and I had produced an album for Ron, and we did that song on his record, but we did it kind of like as a North African kind of vibe combined with this polka. So we tried to do that last night with Al. But then on that, I didn't even really improvise. I kind of let Al. I played the melody with him, and then just a little tiny solo. Ron played a little solo. So it was more about how do we feature that? How do we make him like that's his moment, rather than my thing. It's just like, okay, well, we're going to be part of your world now, and so. But yeah, I try not to worry too much about it. But for instance, like if I'm playing with the Rolling Stones, I'm improvising every night on "Miss You," this famous song of theirs. But that solo is when Mick is out front in front of 50,000 people, and he's moving and dancing, and so I'm watching when he takes the mic and starts the next verse, right? So my solo could be 8 bars, it could be 12, could be 16, could be, depending on his, so I'm actually just watching him, thinking, well, sometimes, occasionally I might go out a little bit too much jazz or whatever, but like I try to really retain more of like, I'm playing almost like rhythm guitar-ish things with a little bit of like, but I'm looking, okay, my solo ends when he starts the verse. So I'm trying to like figure at the end of a phrase to like end so that he is comfortable starting. So then I'm really, it's not so much about me soloing, it's about me playing these lines, riffing a little bit, and then watching him move. And then just like, okay, my solo is based on, and also because I love flamenco, so I'm, a lot of times when I'm playing with dancers, I'm like watching the dancer, how imitating the dance of flamenco, that's changing the way I play. So I don't mind that. I don't feel it's limiting, I feel that's the conversation.
Yeah, that's an astute player required for that kind of thing, I think. And your solos, like that particular solo, that's probably like a 1-chord vamp.
Right, that was 2 chords, but yeah.
Yeah. Is that harder or easier, or is it both? I mean, if you were playing Groovin' High, and then you play over here, you've got a 2-chord vamp, which is more challenging?
You know, they both have their challenges. Not challenges, but you know, I don't want to say limitations. They both have their differences in the sense that with Groovin' High, I'm just playing with a jazz group, and I can kind of, do I defer to Dizzy and Bird, you know, thinking about that, or do I just try to do my thing on that song? But I'm still trying to do my thing also on Miss You, because the original song with Bobby Keys, I'm not playing like Bobby, but I don't want to be too far from it, because I'm riffing, and again, I'm playing because Mick is out there in front of the people, so the show is about, you know, supporting the Stones as best I can. So I'm in a supportive role in that way. And then with Groovin' High, I'm, I guess, freer in a sense, because I'm not worrying about so much, okay, this person's coming in singing the verse. So maybe it's slightly freer that way.
But there's a chord progression to pay more attention to.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, and then it's like, okay, well, on these chords and this way, how do I want to, how far do I want to take this?
Yeah. We might as well talk about the Stones a little bit, as long as we're here. When you got the call, or whatever, to join, was there any question of whether you would or not?
Well, weirdly enough, when I got the call, it was my friends who live in New York who played in the horn section with the Stones. Mike Davis on trombone, Kent Smith on trumpet, and Andy Snitzer, the saxophone player who left the Stones to go with Paul Simon. So he was leaving. They needed a guy who played sax, piano, organ, you know, which I can do that stuff. So when Andy was leaving, they got together and decided a few of the musicians that they knew who could be best suited for that, and they called me. It was like, the call was kind of out of the blue. I wasn't expecting to get the call, but they said, would you be interested in the gig? I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, sure, that sounds amazing. But, you know, growing up as a child, I wasn't thinking, okay, you know, when I'm 25 and I'm 30, that's the gig I'm going for, because it was just, but when it happened, it's like one of those things where you just, those interesting surprises in life are sometimes the best, and you know, and in a way, sometimes I tell this to students, you have to be prepared for those calls, like you may not get a call the second time, like whatever that may be for, like whether it's the Rolling Stones or for a jazz group or who, you know, are you ready for the gig, in the sense that, you know, you've done your preparation, you've worked your butt off and you've practiced and you're ready for the gig. So,
were there written horn parts for you?
Yeah, there were specific horn parts, yes, because there was two saxes, trumpet, trombone, and Bobby Keys had been with him for years. So yeah, there were certain, and then the improvised things were different, but then the horn section parts were, and then the keyboard parts and the organ was very kind of specific. So yeah, I had to learn what those were, and.
How about the intensity of those shows? the volume, the lights. I don't have a question here. I'm sort of just trying to imagine it because I spent some time in a very loud rock band, and I'm wondering what that was like for you.
I mean, it's pretty amazing just being in a place where there's 50, 60, 70,000 people, just the volume of the people, right? I mean, so screaming and yelling and like, you know, the cheering and singing along. I mean, that volume, even without us playing, is already loud. So then you combine that with an array of guitars, basses, and amplifiers and all that stuff. But the good thing is that we're spaced out quite a bit on stage, and I have my own monitor, so I can have in my mix, I'll have a little keyboard, a little bit of voice, a little bit of this, so I can kind of choose what I want. But you know, I'm careful, but I have tinnitus, which is ringing in my ears, but I got that well before the Stones, playing in big bands. You know, being in front of a trumpet or trombone player right by your head. I mean, that's pretty loud already. So it's got its volume, but I luckily can hear what I want from my mix, so I'm pretty okay.
Do the Rolling Stones, the core group, do they ever mess up in a concert?
I mean, I think they would say, yeah, but so what? I think that their mess ups or their little things that happen that are like, you know, slightly different, they're okay with that. You know, for instance, I remember once, you know, Keith has many guitars, and he's got a guitar tech that tunes, like for almost every tune has a new guitar because it's a different tuning. Oh. Like he has, you know, not every tune is chord. So this tune will be that. I remember once he got a guitar and put it on, and either he went to the next song, or it was the wrong guitar, but he went and played the chord, and it was like the wrong thing, and Mick was like, "It's the wrong chord, mate," or something. You know, it's just like. But then it was just laughable. It was like, "Oh, give me this guitar." Then so it was, but. You know, those things happen. I mean, they're human, you know, like it's, but I must say you know, before we play the concerts, we rehearse for a number of weeks, and we've rehearsed, let's say, 90 of their songs, then down to 70, then down to 60. Then by the time the tour starts, let's say we have 40 songs ready to go out. And every night we play like 20, 21, 22 songs. And they'll introduce, you know, maybe of the 21 songs, maybe 16 or 15 are always there, and then they'll intersperse, like, you know, different ballads, a different this or different that. So then we put in those ones that we've rehearsed, and this city will do that song or something like that. So so they're prepared in a sense. I mean, they're really ready. And of course the lighting and the staging and the, you know, everything's set. They have this great, you know, all this tune has that light and this, you know, and they know everything's, you know, it's a show. It's like a major production with hundreds of people that are traveling with us, you know, getting things prepared, and like the sound person and this and the backline people. It's a massive, like, undertaking. So, you know, they're as together as it can be. So any of the mistakes are more like looked at as just part of life. And
do they ever make game time decisions, like change their mind about a song list? Let's insert this now.
Well, we don't get the song list until like right before the show. So we, like, day of the show will be kind of like shows it like maybe by 6 or something. Then we get the set list.
I see.
So every city has its own reasons for that song. Maybe we're in Detroit, we're going to do a Motown too. Maybe we're in Nashville, or this. Maybe we'll do kind of one of their country things. You know, so it depends on where we are. And Chuck Leavell's is the you know, the musical director. So he'll look at, okay, the last time we were in this city, we did these songs, so let's, you know, so not to repeat something when we went back to Cleveland. Well, we did that last time, so let's do this one this time. So it's kind of like, so like we do a sound check, and then like, okay, well, this, you know, by 6, here's the set list. Oh, cool, we're doing this.
Anything that would surprise us about Mick and Keith Richards?
You know, it's like, well, luckily I've known them now for 23 years, so it's like, as I said, they're really prepared. I mean, you know, Keith has a guitar in his hand all the time, and they're always like working on stuff, new songs. They're constantly writing. So, and he's reading books. You know, Ronnie Wood, he's like a great artist, and he's painting all the time. Charlie Watts, who was a huge jazz fan, you know, he's actually also was an artist, and so he has these beautiful sketches that whenever he got to a hotel, when we flew to a different city, he would arrive, and the first thing he would do before he did anything else was unpack, and then he would do a drawing of the room where he was, of that hotel, and then the view out of the window. So I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of these, and no, I luckily got to see some of these, which are amazing. I hope that one day maybe there'll be a gallery that'll show these. So besides his love for jazz, and so I probably hung out with Charlie more than anybody because, you know, we were just jazz freaks. So we would go out and have dinner and then go hear some music in a city to hear jazz, and then often I would set up a gig and he would come and play with me, and so it was great. And Ronnie, I mean, and you get to know their kids and their grandkids and their wives. So you kind of just, it's this big family, and but it's a great production, but also it's a big traveling family, and you know, and it's very special. It's a really unique situation, and luckily feel close to them in a way, you know, as close as you can to people who are so famous, you know, like, but you know, it's in a very inviting, relaxed vibe, and they keep, luckily I've knocked on wood, they've had me back all these years, and so it's been great to have this gig for so long.
When one of the tours ends, do you speculate on, will they do this again? They
yes.
keep doing it again, don't they?
But I really look at the end of every tour that's the last one, because I can't, first of all, they're almost 80. Charlie unfortunately died at 80, but Mick's, you know, they're turning 79 this year. So it's kind of like, and it's their 60th anniversary tour, 60 years of doing this. So it's like incredible. And you know, going back where the surprise is, Mick, of course, you see a guy who's that age running around stage, and you think, how does he do it? Well, because he eats right, he has a trainer on the road, he exercises, he's in incredible shape. So it's kind of almost like an inspiration, realizing, hey, you know, you're approaching 80, you don't have to sit in the chair in the corner of your room and just read a book and be feeble. I mean, you can be active and moving, and he's proof of that. I mean, you know, he takes care of himself, and he's really diligent about being careful with his body and his taking care of, and he's practices. He took voice lessons, even in his late 60s or whatever. He's like started getting a vocal coach, because you realize, hey, to keep this together, warming up and all of that. So he really is like dedicated to. I think they're better now than they were, in a way.
Wow, 60 years. You've played with a lot of other pop artists, we'll call it. If you have Spotify on or Sirius Radio, things come on the radio and you go, I think I was on that. Does that happen to you?
It has, or I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot about doing that. Oh, it has happened where we'll like, I think that I did that. Is that even me? You know, like that could be me. I mean, because I did a lot of recordings in New York with different acts and different performers and artists and stuff, and I often remember most things, but then something slips. You know, oh yeah, I did that, or even. But it's kind of a cool thing to have the experience of performing with so many people over the years, and you know, being influenced by their music, and then getting a chance to play. Like I got a chance to record with Elvin Jones, who was like arguably one of the greatest musicians who ever lived on any instrument. But then, and I haven't told this ever publicly, but a couple of my close friends know this. But again, like when I was until I was 50, accepting people, you know, saying, "Oh, we enjoyed the night," and I can say thank you. When I recorded with Elvin, he said, well, you know, I'm going on the road soon. He said, make sure you give my wife your information, because we'd like to take you on the road. Now, this was in my 30s. What I heard was, you recorded with John Coltrane. What could I possibly do? I did not go. I did not give her my number, because I was like, I'm not ready. So I got a chance to play with him, but I didn't travel with him. And I look back at that as like one of the greatest mistakes of my life, because it's like, he must have heard something that was, you know, enough for him to say, would you like to go on the road with us? So, and I was like, man. at that time in my life, I was like, well, I'm not ready for this gig. It's Elvin Jones. But now I look at it, he's not here anymore, and I was like, so I wouldn't make that same choice,
Would that have been like, I remember having albums with him and Joe Farrell, two tenors.
Yeah.
Was that the situation that you were in when you played with him? Like no chordal instrument?
No, this particular thing was with three. It was like it was an album. It wasn't even. He wasn't even leading the thing. It was like he was a side person like myself, but so it was like really a great combination of people. Gary Bartz, Christian McBride, Kenny Warner. So it was kind of a cool thing. It was like three horns, rhythm section, and he was on it with a singer, Rosanna Vitro, and it was like. And so we started talking, and so we're both from the Detroit area, talking about, he's older than me, obviously, but people that he knew that I played with when I was growing up, and so it was just a great connect, and he was such a sweet person. He was like, and he was like, we're going on the road soon, you gotta give her your number, because we know we need, because it was like between saxophone players. It was after, Pat LaBarbera had stopped playing with him, who was a great musician from upstate New York, and I was just like, I wasn't ready. In my mind, I wasn't, first of all, I'd never be ready. It's like, he's Elvin Jones. But man, I'm glad I got the experience. I would have loved to have played 6 nights a week with.
You're the second person who said he was such a sweet person. And I got stuck with this image. I saw him once, many years ago in Washington, D.C., I think, and, he was playing and he was sweating and he had this look on his face of just this intensity, and I sort of made this assumption that he was not a sweet person because he didn't look at that point.
Right.
So I'm happy to hear that.
And I got to see him live when I still lived in Detroit, and he came and played Baker's Keyboard Lounge, one of the famous clubs in the world. And and it was a couple of my friends were in town, so I was this close to him. I mean, we sat right by the drum set, and he actually, because he plays with the intensity, and he actually broke the head of the snare, because he just hits the ever-loving piss out of the instrument. But after who we played with, all those musicians, first of all, growing up and playing with all those guys in Detroit, then moving to New York, then playing with Coltrane, having played all that music, I think that someone like that, and I try to do the same, is like every night you give up everything you have to the music. And I think that's why I had that, the sweating and he just was like giving every ounce of himself, every note, every phrase, so like that. But then, like when I was there and I was like sitting with my friends, I was young at the time, and I was like, and he saw us there and he knew we were fans, and he came over and sat with us. Because we were like, afraid to approach Elvin Jones, but he was like, because I can see you guys are musicians. And he came over and sat, and he talked for like an hour. It was just like, oh my God, this is our hero, came to our table and hung with us. It was like,
oh, you can't beat that.
Untouchable. It's like, the gods have just descended,
Sheila Jordan told me a pretty horrific story about the racial atmosphere in Detroit. It would have been, she's somewhat older, of course, but did you witness anything like that, going to those clubs with your father?
Yes, only in the sense of like, I would, often would be the only white person within a few miles, not only of the club, but like in the entire neighborhood. And I remember the first time I went, there's a famous trumpet player, Marcus Belgrave, who kind of was like, helped Kenny Garrett, Jerry Allen, Robert Hurst, a lot of people played with him. And so he kind of like continued that lineage of like, Donald Byrd and Yusef Lateef and Charles McPherson and all those amazing, Elvin and all those Detroit, Joe Henderson, Pepper Adams, all those people who came through Detroit, Hank Jones, I could go on. The list is so vast. So Marcus was like the guy when I was growing up. So I went and I had met Robert Hurst, Bob Hurst, the bass player, and so he said, well, you can come and sit in. So I was there waiting my turn to sit in. I didn't want to just like, run up to the stage, So at the end of the set, and it was like the vibe was a little bit like I hadn't met them, and it was like, but it wasn't so much like, but I swear to God, once I played, I mean, like literally everybody in the room hugged me, not just the band, but like it was like the acceptance of being around music because these, for me, black music or African American culture was like what I grew up on, the Soul Train. It was like I wanted to attain to that high level of music. So I think the idea is like, I never felt weirdness, but like, and I was accepted because it was like, this music. And I remember my father saying when I was a little kid, like 14, 15, 16, when he saw the clubs and the fact that I was able to sit in and play with, and that a lot of bands were mixed, it wasn't just all black, all white. And I had very good connections in Detroit with the people that I played with that were bands of mixed, white or black or whatever. And I remember him saying when I was young, he goes, you don't know how lucky you are that you are able to be, playing with these great musicians, but also, racially mixing. And I'm like, well, of course. But I didn't think about it. We're talking about mid-'70s, late 70s. I wasn't considering, and then realizing as the older I get, I realize how still messed up it is. How we're still in 2022. Why is there even an issue with, like not having, like even still having racially, like you live over there, I live over here, and like this distance that exists still. I can't imagine based on the color of your skin or who, your religion or any of that stuff. It makes no sense to me, and yet we seem to have gotten more polarized even in the last few years as, politically things are getting crazier. It seems like we're back in the 50s again or something. I can't understand it, but musicians luckily don't think about this. We're just like, you can play, I can play, let's have fun. I think music and sports is a great connector, and because it doesn't matter what your neighborhood you're from, where you grew up, who your parents are, what your religion is. You can kick a ball around. Let's kick that ball around. You can play those. You want to play, grooving high. Let's play that. And if you play it on that level, you meet there. You meet in this high place. All the other stuff doesn't mean shit. So we try to leave all that stuff away. But really, as musicians, we have to, I think it's, if it weren't for music, poetry, theater, literature, sports, all of these things that do luckily get us to a great meeting point. If it weren't for that, society would be in utter peril. We do have that ability to do that. Most people, just the average person living in a house over there, you go across the street, it's fair to say that maybe it could even be that they work in an office with another person, like if they're a white person, maybe they work in an office with a black person, but maybe they would never have gone and had a drink with that person or invited them to their house. Like, are you actually friends with another person that doesn't look like you? I don't know. Maybe, but probably not. It seems like it's not, I hate to say white or black, but it's not that simple, but we still haven't, well, here we are, Russia's attacking. Why does war have to happen? Why does it have to be racial discrimination? Why does there have to be even the question? And yet, they're even talking about now, how do you even, people are not even willing to talk about history as it happened. Like, even the history that just happened in the 60s with, Martin Luther King Jr. Like, are you not willing to at least look at the reality of racial discrimination over the past year? Forget about slavery, which is the most horrific thing ever. Slavery, the Holocaust, these are like the most horrific things that have ever happened to human existence. But then that happened, right? Let's talk about that. Like, you're a white person, you didn't do that personally, you weren't responsible for that, but do you have a responsibility to at least assess, like, hey, this is part of, this actually happened. People are wanting to erase history, even present, even though it's happening right now, the attack on the Capitol. They don't want to look at that as even, that wasn't that bad. Actually, it was horrific. the people are not willing to even address history. So I can see why they don't want to think about, oh, I wasn't there, I didn't do that. Well, no, but moving forward, how can we change the outlook? What can you do as a person to make sure that not only is it not happening now, but it never happens again?
These circumstances, from last night, I got to hear a number of your original compositions, and you seem to be affected by certain occurrences and then able to express your reaction to them in music, which you mentioned this incident about 20 years ago in Paris. When you sit you said there was a little piano after this subway incident, and I don't know if you can describe how that emotion, probably shock, translates into a composition.
Well, it's again, I feel it's just the music is there, and whether it's like I'm just capturing it and not getting in the way of it, which is kind of what happened in that situation where this song I wrote, Saint Michel, which is based on that 70 or so people being killed, and had it not been a beautiful day, if it had been raining, I would have been in that drain, because it was like, oh, it's so nice, I'm going to walk. It's going to take me an hour, but I'm going to be outside. Paris is the greatest city for walking, maybe besides Rome. It's like one of those places where you can get lost and spend hours just, oh, let's go down here, just so. Thankfully, it was a gorgeous day, but then knowing that happened, I got back to my friends. It literally was a toy piano the size of like the Linus thing. It was like maybe 4 octaves, and it was out of tune. But that I wrote that song because it just was like, it just happened. It just came out. I didn't think, actually. It really just came out. And that's happened a number of times in my life where it's just like, I feel like these things happen. In fact, my mother died really tragically very quickly, and she used to talk about guardian angels. And so I wrote a song called Guardian Angels that came out of one of my records. And then, so she used to talk about this, that my brother who died was like watching over me. So then I remember I did a lot of work with this fado singer, Anna Mora. And it was just after my mother died, I wrote this song, and I didn't have any lyrics to it. And I didn't title it, but I wanted to write this song for Anna because fado music is so powerful and so passionate, and really loved it. So I wrote this song for the recording. And her producer, the guy who plays guitar for her, George Fernando, who's amazing, I sent it to them so that they could, learn it. And he goes, well, can I put lyrics to this? I said, well, sure. So I didn't say anything about the song, what it was about, or even my feeling. I just sent the song. He gets it, and he starts writing lyrics. I get there. I flew to Lisbon. They had already recorded the guitar, the Portuguese guitar. They recorded her vocal. I was just there then, and I was like, wow, that's really beautiful. What is the song? What are the lyrics? And he said, well, my feeling was, I call this Velo Anjo, which is fallen angel. And I immediately got chills. And he said, the lyrics are about an angel that's dying slowly and the feathers are coming off the wing. I'm getting chills thinking about it, because, so you talk about what music does, not only to me, but like that person on the other side of the world felt something in the music with just the notes and the chords. But that translated to him, and he put that into lyrics without me even saying a word. Just the feeling of it. So it was like, okay, that exists. So that is there just in the notes without any lyrics. So he put the lyrics to it. Was like, I said, you can't imagine what you just did for me. Like even if I would have told you, but so these feelings are there. We musicians, we can capture that.
I've often wondered, song titles can be obvious or it's possible to write a tune and say, well, I don't know what to call this. And the fact that you hadn't titled it left that opening for him, perhaps, or maybe he would have gone there anyway, but it's a great story.
It was the combination of my mother just dying and like, you know, that feeling of like, and then thinking how would this work with a fado singer, knowing she would just bring so much passion to the song. But that was it. It was like, you know, just, but most of my music is written thinking about a person in my life or an experience that I've had, and I try not to get technical with my music in a sense like, you know, I'm gonna do this slick thing. It's more about like this particular feeling that I have. And most of them almost none of them have lyrics. It's just
So the diverse things you've done in your career, I had mentioned earlier on these 3 videos, and you went from jazz griots with that lick in there, and then a gypsy band from Budapest, then to trading licks with a flamenco dancer. Are these projects and directions simply the product of your big ears, your curiosity, or are they sometimes directed by economics, what's happening in the business now? I mean, what goes into these projects, which I imagine are never easy? I want to assemble this group of people and do this particular kind of music.
Yeah, it's never it's never easy, and I don't ever think about the money part of it. And I probably should. If I was more wise that way, I would maybe have a lot more money. But all of the projects are just like, this is what I want to do, and somehow I'm going to make it happen. Somehow, like the Jazz Griots is just like this project with Jordan Walker Perlman, and he's a film director in LA. And only because I was on a flight going from New York to LA, I was sitting next to a gentleman who's a producer, and he's a lawyer, but he's also a film producer, so he finds interesting projects to do. And he actually did a really amazing film called, you know, Equal Means Equal, about women's rights. And he's just one of these incredible humans that, like, you know, and ironically, I was sitting in my seat on the aisle, and it was like one of those things right before the door shut. I thought, oh, great, I'm going to have a whole row to myself to LA. I can start it. Right before the door shut, this guy comes in with his son, and they sit next to me. But I was actually wearing this hat, and you know, he actually goes, "Oh, that's a really cool hat." I said, "Oh, well, thank you." So anyway, that started the conversation. And he goes, "Oh, I like hats." I go, "Yeah." I said, "You want to try it on?" Anyway, he said, "I've never worn hats." Anyway, that started the conversation. What do you do? I didn't even talk about the Rolling Stones. I'm a musician. Oh, he goes, anyway, well, I'm going all the way to LA, talking the whole flight. And he's like, well, I'm actually producing a film, and we're doing we're showing it for the first time out. He said, why don't you come to the film? I said, well, I'm doing a recording, so I can't. Oh, well, here's my card. And it turns out our houses were near each other. Well, let's have lunch when we get back. Okay, cool. So we're leaving the airplane. We'll have fun. So now we're waiting for our bags to come off the turnstile. Now, LA is huge, right? So then we're like, okay, where are you going? Well, what's your hotel? Well, I'm staying at this hotel. Wait a minute, you're at the same hotel? No, I'm staying at this hotel because it's 2 blocks away from the recording studio, Capitol Studios, and that famous round building where Frank Sinatra recorded, right? And even the Beatles. So for me, it was convenient. For him, he was way on the other side. He just was like, oh, I just picked it because it looked like an interesting hotel. So I'm like, wow. I said, look, I have to go there. We'll share the taxi. Now we're talking again. Then I get to meet his wife, who was meeting him at the hotel. So we had breakfast. It was like, then it became like, but because I had this connection with him, I told him about my idea for the Jazz Griots. He goes, I think that sounds really interesting. I'd like you to meet this film director. And first of all, I don't believe anybody who says anything in the business, whether it's film or music, because I think they're just like being nice. Turns out he was being nice, and he got back to New York. Sure enough, I met with this director, Jordan Walker Perlman. He goes, I hear you have ideas for movies. And I actually took out a list of like 10 ideas. And he looks at these ideas and he goes, I think we should do that one first. What do you think? I said, yeah. He goes, okay, let's start. And believe it or not, we filmed already 2, and then right before the pandemic. So we're trying to now start again. But it's my idea that African American culture, music, has to be recognized as how brilliant it actually is, rather than, like even the films that are made about jazz, the concept is, drugs and alcohol. It's like, rather than like, wait a minute, to play music as to that level, like Elvin Jones or Jack DeShonette or Miles Davis or Wayne Shorter or Duke Ellington, you have to be unbelievably brilliant to be able to play that at that level, that brilliantly. And I want white people to know how brilliant they are. So in their own words, like the filming of the music, but then also capturing them talking about music, their life, so that documentation of this while these musicians are still alive. And we lost a lot of them. Jimmy Heath died, and Barry Harris, a lot of musicians that we're trying to get passed away. So we're running against the clock a little bit. So sorry that was so long, but but yeah, all these projects are great. And the flamenco, in fact, because I was in Lisbon with this fado singer Ana Moura, we had just finished that recording that I talked about, and I saw that Sarah Barris, that famous dancer that's on my recording film, I saw that she was performing in Madrid, and they were like, let's go. So at like 1 o'clock in the morning, we left Lisbon and drove to Madrid all night. We arrived at like 7 o'clock in the morning, went to this friend's house, and we hung out, and then I was gonna go see Sarah. This was a Thursday night or whatever. They were playing for a week there. As it turns out, then I stayed in Madrid Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then I started hanging out. They invited me on stage, and I performed Thursday night with them, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That began my association because of that connection. Like, taking an opportunity, like I'm not gonna miss out on recording with Elvin. I missed that, but I'm not gonna miss. I'm taking every opportunity I can to do the things that I want to do while I'm still here.
3 cheers for serendipity.
Yeah, it's like, if you want to do something, just do it. So then I realized, hey, you know what? The worst thing somebody could say is no. Like, okay, I asked. But maybe no doesn't mean no. Maybe it just means no right now, but maybe in 2 months it could be a yes, or maybe. But most people said yes. So if you ask.
You said yes to me.
Absolutely.
When you do your taxes at the end of the year, let's say now, and 25 years ago, have you noticed a significant change in how you're able to make a living? That with all the different things you do, has it shifted? If you look at I make so much from the studio, I make this, and how's it changed for you?
A drastic change. I mean, in fact, before the Stones gig, primarily I was just in New York, working in the studio, doing even sometimes Broadway shows, recording sessions for whoever. Could be a jingle for a commercial, for a TV commercial, could be a record date for a particular person, or live gigs or whatever. And then because I had young children at the time, I was trying not to travel as much. So I was just making a pretty good living just right in New York. Then the Stones gig came up. Then I was on the road quite a bit. I was already on the road doing my own things. And then the Stones gig became more, then it was like more on the road. Then it was like the Stones and then my things, which are again on the road. So then I was leaving the New York scene more and more and more. But then even the recording scene changed over the years too. Not as many, like you'd show up on a record date and maybe like a big group, a full big band, or like an orchestra. That's becoming less and less and less. And then also the weird thing is, like, you have the Rolling Stones gig, which has been incredible, but then sometimes they'll tour we'll do like, let's say 6 months, and then maybe take a year off, or 3 months, and then take 9 months off. So there's a lot of time where I'm actually in New York, but people will run into you on the street and they'll go, oh, you still out with the Stones? And I'm like, well, yes, but I'm here for like 4 months, so I could work. So, but the idea is like, oh, you're always away, you're always out. So yeah, it's a funny balance. So you kind of like, when you're in New York, then you have to show up on the scene and be seen in a way, like, oh, you're here, okay, well, I didn't know you were here, well, yeah, I'm here. So then, but then also, then so the more of the things that I do are more of my own projects. So you had to kind of design your own. You kind of have to make the phone ring yourself, making these projects happen because out of necessity, out of desire, passion, you know.
Do you still get called for a club date? Like, oh, we need some background jazz for a cocktail party. You still get those calls, and do you take them?
Not so much anymore. Once in a great while, I'll you know, yeah, if I'm, well, I was on a flight once with going from Sweden back to the U.S., and this lady was sitting next to me who turns out to be a really famous photographer, and her thing was doing these lions, a pride of lions in Africa that she had followed for many years. And we had an interesting conversation, and she was going to get married, and she wanted me to fly to Africa for the wedding and play with my East Gypsy band from Budapest in Africa. And I'm like, wow, that sounds interesting. I've never been to Africa. Why not? And so it turns out they couldn't make it. And da-da. So anyway, the wedding then became in Sweden. And then she said, well, she goes, instead of your East Gypsy band, can you bring, she goes, the theme of our wedding is actually Italian music, you know, like an Italian theme. She goes, and actually specifically Sicilian. I said, well, I actually have friends who have a Sicilian jazz band. I said, I could bring that. She goes, wow. So and then it turns out, like, because I have all these good friends in Toronto, Detroit, and Sicily, and so we all met in Sweden to play this gig. So Detroit, Toronto, New York, Sicily meet in Sweden to play this concert. So it was like for a wedding, but like really kind of a concert in the restaurant where the wedding was. It was really cool. So those kind of things.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more like, you know, the Elks Club in Passaic, New Jersey. Or something. That's some club date.
Yeah, it was very cool. So the Elks Club, not so much, but I did those as a kid. Sure. With my dad's band.
Yeah. I wanted to follow up way back, and you talked about sitting in some of the places in Detroit. When you were fairly young, how did you prepare to be ready for those moments? Because getting asked to sit in and then you get on stage and well, how about Nardis? Ooh, no, I don't know that one. Was there a way to get ready for that, or did they let you suggest a tune?
Well, luckily, there was a really cool jazz club in Toledo, Ohio, called Rusty's. Her name was Rusty Monroe, and she had this club for many, many, many years. And she cooked the food. And I remember once, like, as she got older, and she was telling me about how long it took for her to actually start making money as an owner of a jazz club. It was a very popular place. A lot of musicians who came through town. Joe Henderson played there. You know, and all the Detroit musicians would come down because it was really close. It's like less than an hour drive from Detroit to Toledo. So at that club, that's where I first started going with my father, who would drive me there. And there was a guy named Eddie Abrams, an old musician, and he would let all the young people come and sit in. Like, you know, all of us who were 13, 14, 15, 16, like Ron Oswansky was playing. When I started playing there when I was getting older, he just turned 48, so, you know, he's 12, 13 years difference. So when he was a kid, he would then come sit in with me. So I figured that's how you learn. So Eddie would let me sit in, first playing a blues, and I would take a song that I would know, and he'd go, what do you want to play? What do you know? How about this? He'd go, okay, let's do that. So he'd let me sit in. So as a kid, you know, and then this guy named Claude Block, another pianist from the area, let me sit in. So these, you know, like, you know, Cass Harris, this trumpet player from Detroit, he would be playing. So they would let me sit in. Gene Parker, Jimmy Cook, then more, you know, like I say, Marcus Belgrave. So then you learn more and more tunes, and then they were kind enough to let me, as a kid, what did I know? Nothing. You know, so they were very inviting, very like, hey, what do you know? So it was like, okay, so the next time I go, I'm going to learn 2 more songs. Then through, you know, then you start learning more songs. And then eventually then I started playing with his band, you know. In fact, last night I did something, and I ended the song a certain way, and Ron says, it sounds like an Eddie Abrams ending. You know, it was kind of a cool thing, because he had a particular thing, and then there was another organist, a pianist that I used to play with, you know, in Detroit. There's just like a certain way of playing and vibe from the Detroit sound. You know, had its own thing.
I wonder if that ending was ba-da-da-dee-da, ba-da-da-dee-da, because you did that at the end of
Maybe whatever song that was.
Bye
Bye Blackbird.
I think
Yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
whoa, wait, what is that? What is that?
Well, you know, you're ending the tune, and it's like, okay, that's, you know, it's like you sound like a band, even though we hadn't played together as a band. So it was like, that makes it sound like, you know, like
I love the moment. Audience members sometimes don't know these kind of little things that go on, but I think it was in Willow Weep for Me, and the form had gone to its conclusion. I think it was an alto solo, and I saw you like 4 beats before you stood up and you said something to Ron, and the band went to the bridge instead of back to the top.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure you said bridge.
Yeah.
And that's so, I love it. The on-stage etiquette and the learning of the craft and how things work. I don't have a question, except it was cool.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things, because you know, I played the melody, and then Mike played an alto solo. And it was like I didn't need a solo. It was like the song was long enough. I was okay with just playing the melody, and then Mike took the solo. It was like, hey, let's take the bridge out. We don't need more than that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's, you know, why make a tune 10 minutes when it could be, say, as much as you need in 5. You know.
Well, I'm pretty sure you made musical history last night.
Oh, I don't
because know. I'm going to guess that there's never been a medley of Willow Weep for Me into I Can't Get No Satisfaction into the Beer Barrel Polka. So, congratulations.
Wow. I did not plan that in any way. It just, oh my God. Well, I realized because we were going to go until 10 o'clock. And I looked at my watch, and it was like, also, maybe that, because we were in Willow Weep for Me at like 10 to 10, because I didn't want to go too much past that or whatever. And I thought, well, I'll play Satisfaction, because if there's Stones fans there, they want to do that. So we went into that, and I saw Al in the front again, and the accordion was still out, and I thought, well, how do we get Al up again? And then so he comes up, and I didn't think about the Beer Barrel Polka, but he was playing, and Ron was saying, just play on this, just play on C. And I thought, well, but you know, he's trying to think, how can I play? And I thought, you know what? Everyone knows this polka. Certainly Al would know it, and I know Ron knows it, and I used to play polkas with my dad's band, because that's one thing. You have to play rock, you have to play, you know, Irving Berlin, and you got to play a polka, because somebody might want to dance to that. So I just thought, if I play that, Al's going to be able to jump in, which he did. So it's like, you know, again, how do you make it work with all, here you have one of the polka kings there, you got to have him play a polka.
I love it. And not everybody would be able to do that. Like, be able to say, okay, I'm in this key, the melody, and you do that, boom, in your head, like, in an instant. And
well, I was trying to think of another polka that would be even more, like, sort of obscure, that like Al would be like, wow, you know that? But in my head, I was like, okay, also, it's getting late, and it's 10 o'clock. I thought, okay, surely everybody in the room would know that, and that's why when Ron did that, da, 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 everyone roll, you know, then everyone could join and sing it. So then it became like the whole room could be part of it.
Yeah, I commented to someone as we were going out the door, I said, I bet you didn't expect the night was going to end like that. It was terrific. Audience communication. And I think it's obvious you learned from your father, and maybe even from the Stones, like, about the entertainment factor involved in presenting music. I saw it.
Well, I mean, you know, I try my best not to be like, you hate to say, well, like you said, you know, one of the great ballads, you know, Will You Wait For Me, to the Stones. That's one of the most famous songs ever. Satisfaction has been covered by everybody, from Aretha Franklin to Stevie Wonder to, well, it's just so famous, to the Beer Barrel Polka. Everyone who knows a polka, that's probably the most well-known polka. So it's almost like, you know, I'm trying not to make it like too kitschy or too like, you know, like, I'm not trying to go like, ultra entertainment, but it was like on that night in that room with those people who were in part of the mix. I mean, how often are you going to have a polka accordion player sitting in the front with his accordion out and not make that part of the night? It's like, it's like, so, or a different night would be a different thing. And because I'm always, if I have a friend that's there, I will always invite them on stage, because then it brings a new element to the band, So I try to do it what is happening right then, because that's the most important thing. And I was mentioning this to Mr. Domenico today. We just had a cup of coffee before coming over here, and I was talking about how nice it was to play in a small venue. Even though there wasn't that many people, some of the most beautiful evenings of sharing experiences are in small places, because 50,000 people is amazing. But then after the gig, you're not going to go across the street and have a bar, at the bar, and have a beer with the people who just saw you, and really develop like a community with the community of people who live there. But then also to include that, and one of the most incredible nights of my life was with this group of Roma musicians from Budapest. We went to Romania to play a gig at this really cool venue, small place, and it was such a nice night. We moved it out to the back deck because it was a full moon, perfect weather, about 100 people sitting, and it was ultra quiet. It was like you could hear a pin drop, and people were so, it was a totally acoustic, no amplification, acoustic bass, acoustic piano, acoustic drums. And it was like the connection with the audience with this beautiful night, and all the people afterwards. We hung for hours talking to the local people. It was like, those are the nights that are the most special, because you're not only connecting with the people on the stage who I have this great association with, but then, oh my God, you get to meet interesting people from Romania who love music and art, and you talk about culture and literature. How about this book? And you're like, wow, then you really connect with like this part of the world.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm really glad we could have it. I'm going to wrap up with an observation about your playing, and then I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment. I particularly noticed your wonderful ability to play subtone really down at the bottom of the tenor. And then on the other hand, when you played your soprano, it was like ballsy. Because I hate when the soprano is played like you're using one lung. That sort of like special. At any rate, I want to know what, to wrap up, what do you like about your playing?
Well, that's definitely putting me on the spot. No. Well, I try, the first thing you hear from a person is their voice, right? I mean, so whether you're talking or the singing, or, almost like, so the appealing nature of sound. So I feel like, okay, the first thing you have is like, the ability, hopefully, to translate. And I tell this to young musicians, if I've had students over the years, talking about, you are the instrument. Because the saxophone is just a piece of metal. You can put a different mouthpiece and different reed. Of course, everything makes a difference, but it doesn't do anything on its own. So I'm playing it, so I'm the instrument. I'm breathing life into this piece of metal. So, so I guess what I try to do, and I attempt to do, so I don't know if it's what I like about my playing, but I try, is to make it as much, humanize the instrument as I can. To make it not sound like an instrument, so that it's just my voice. That's the idea. And with the soprano, and what you're noticing, when I play soprano, I think about it as a trumpet more than the saxophone, because I started on trumpet, and because my dad played the trumpet, and I even hold it straight out like a trumpet. So I'm more thinking about trumpet and singing than the saxophone. But having said that, I also studied a lot of classical, and I played in a saxophone quartet playing soprano, so we were really doing a lot of string quartet kind of, so I really studied that a lot. So that's maybe what that sound is. I'm trying to be really focused on the sound of the soprano. But tenor was my first instrument, so, and like thinking about, the tenor sometimes is just like this beautiful, like cello sounding thing, and I'm playing a wooden mouthpiece, so I try to have this like low resonance of. So I don't know. I mean, I do my best to humanize it. And, you know, in all of this thing, I should just maybe end with saying about this ensemble that I have called the Universal Spirits Ensemble. And it's a group of musicians. It was originally for the idea of the conflict that was happening with Israeli, Palestinian, and Lebanese, because I figured, okay, the world is just, this is 30 years ago, but now the world is just, everything's crazy everywhere, including in this country. So the band is like Israeli, Palestinian, Lebanese, Afghani, South African, Cuban, Puerto Rican. So it's like a really mixed group of people, not really talking about religion or politics, but just like these, the world is playing together. So the idea is to go around the world into smaller communities where maybe somebody lives 2 hours away from a big city, but maybe they won't go to that city. I want to take the city to them, take the world to them, teaching young kids to see them. Maybe you're like in a community with like a high school kid, maybe have this young flute player playing with a South African and an Afghani and a Palestinian musician, and maybe that changes her life forever, and maybe that changes that community. So like last night in this small community, you know, how do you connect with that community? So we're, you know, creating ambassadors for peace and goodwill around the world. So we're playing in New York April 6th at this great place called Drome, D-R-O-M, and President Carter invited us to play at the Carter Center, so we played there. So hopefully that group can do more as it comes. So that's what I'm focusing on, is that, you know, ambassadorship of goodwill
And
through
there's
this music.
a tradition of that with jazz ambassadors. So thank you for today and for last night.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations on your career so far, and whatever you're going to do next.
Oh, and you're so kind, Monk, for having it. It's beautiful. Congratulations all the years you've been doing this. Like, you've captured pretty impressive array of I looked at your list, I'm like, these are all my heroes and favorite musicians. So
it's been a rather good gig, I'll say that.
Thank you for doing this. It's really amazing.
All right.